Good morning. Please turn with me to Daniel chapter 12 as we look at the title this morning, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm glad you laughed. I don't want it to be like a kaboom. But it is a countdown to the end because at least 4 times in chapter 12 he's literally going to talk about, it's not just the last chapter of the book, he's talking about the end. And as we've talked about in the short lessons a little bit, the end in biblical language does not always mean the end of all things. Sometimes it means, as we say in our common language, the end of an era. And so here, one of the mysteries is sorting out what he's exactly talking about within all the imagery that we have seen up to this point. So the 4 really has to do with the way I want to try to organize the discussion. I want it as much as possible to kind of just me to maybe just be a human concordance, where I'm just taking you to different parts of the Bible that also talk about the end times and may give us an understanding, at least a little bit more, of what Daniel might be talking about in some of these very, even to him, he said, I didn't understand it. And he's literally one of the, I would say, brightest stars in the biblical sky. And he still didn't get it. So maybe we will be able to use the Bible to interpret itself to help us understand that 4 is going to come up twice. Back in chapter 2, we saw the famous statue with 4 parts as we mentioned last week. However, in this week's reading, it's going to come up again because in chapter 7, he's going to talk about 4 animals. First thing to maybe understand is, as we talked briefly on Wednesday night about this concept of generational sin. One of the reasons that the word says, today is the day. If you hear his heart, hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Because when these prophecies come has a lot to do with what it is that he may be trying to get across to the kings that this man Daniel is prophesying to. Understand that the 4 parts of the statue, they come up in chapter 2 to King Nebuchadnezzar, the man who took Israel or Judah into captivity. The 4 animals, however, are a prophecy given directly to Daniel to his son. The next chapter we will get to, there's going to be a prophecy about 2 animals in chapter 8. And understand what I might be completely superimposing onto the passage, but the reason generational sin became a thing with me is understand that all of these animal prophecies, or really all of these 4, 3, 2, 1 prophecies, are really dealing with 4 kingdoms. But what happens in life is, if you know the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament, part of the timeline is a period of silence where God simply stops talking to his people. And so understand, as Nebuchadnezzar's son takes the baton from him, he is telling his dad about a kingdom, a head of gold in chapter 2, as we said, who is Nebuchadnezzar, and 3 kingdoms that are going to follow him. By the time he's talking to his son, he starts out talking about 4 kingdoms, but later on, he's going to give that son a prophecy that just talks about 2. And understand that we saw back in chapter 5 where that son is going to get notice the same day that his kingdom is going to be no more. And so as these numbers are winding down, what we seem to see is a God who is no longer talking about the role that Babylon will have in the future. And it's almost like when he said to his own people, Israel, I've sent you prophets, I've sent you X, I've sent you Y, I've sent you Z. We're no longer going to talk about you as a part of the future plan. We're just going to let you know what's going to happen now that you've refused all of the messengers that I've sent. And so that is what seems to be the cold conclusion of the 3, 2, 1. You go from 4 statues or 4 images in each of the dreams to the final prophecy that this young man gets being only of 2 kingdoms. It's basically a picture of a future without him. And here's the thing. Going forward, the blessing for each of us is, God willing, he's still talking to us in the 4 phase. He's still talking to us of a future that includes us. Understanding that none of us are going to live forever. God willing, we look into the subtleties that there is going to be a 2 and a 1 and a 0 for all of us. But the thing that Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's son, didn't make good use of was the time when God was telling him it was winding down. And so as he is getting the 4 images, God willing, he is helping us understand that even though he might not have made the most of his time, what we will do is understand the 4 image periods in our life. And we will not waste the countdown as it gets to a 2 image period. And we will ask God, much like Daniel did, over and over, God, I don't understand, but what is really the meaning of all of this? As we continue on, the 2 is going to wind down to what seems to be, like we mentioned, the 4 kingdoms don't have to take my word for it. By the time I get to a chapter 11 discussion, if you get time and you get really bored and you want to click on the extended discussion I did at chapter 12, I break down all of the beasts. Or you can look it up on yourself. There are a lot of people who have broken these down. The four animals being the lion with wings. Sounds odd. But the lion with wings gives way to a bear that has 3 ribs in his mouth and is told to devour much flesh, which gives way to a leopard with 4 heads, which seems kind of odd, but it's going to give way to something even more odd because, as we talked about on Wednesday night, it's going to look like a movie beast, something like Godzilla, except it's going to have 10 horns on its head. And all of this is going to look super similar to images that we're going to see in the Revelation. Why? Because Brother Barry has already taken us through. By the time you get to Revelation chapter 13, there's going to be one beast that is going to seem to have all of the figurative characteristics of the 4 kingdoms he's talking about. By the time you get to chapter 8, he's going to tell you the Greeks are the ones that seem to have this image of 4 coming up over and over again, because those are 4 kings that are going to arise in Greece after all of this. They're going to replace the Medo-Persians. He's literally going to tell you that. And I've already told your dad he's the head of gold. And so what happens is, as you see the characteristics, that's not what I'm going to have time to preach. So if you want to look at chapter 11, I break down the practical characteristics of all of these kings that God says are going to only rule for a short, relatively short period of time. And as our brother said in the communion talk, the encouraging part is whether here we get a sample of it, here just preparing us for what's coming up in heaven, the victory is that we arise to something that is more permanent. And so the lasting lesson for these animal imageries is helping us to understand, as we mentioned before, the kinds of things that have longevity and the kinds of things that don't. And so when you're looking at these kingdoms, you're saying, I don't really care about a lion, a bear, any of it. Don't care about the animals. Care about the very real human characteristics he assigns to each of them, and compare it to the things that he says are actually going to last as we get past the preamble and actually get into chapter 12. But bear with me for just a little bit longer as we talk about how the 2 point forward to a 1. So as those 2 kingdoms, the kingdoms that are going to follow Media and Persia, as the 2 kingdoms that are going to follow Babylon, Media, Persia, and the kingdom of Greece, they're going to give way to, once again, another kingdom that is not described, but it's much more frightening than all the rest. The one thing he says is, before it gets actually maybe seemingly unbearable, there's someone who is going to rise. And we typically associate that with being the Christ. But there's somebody else who actually plays a pretty huge role in the future of Israel, at least as it's revealed to Daniel at this point. And so let's just start with the text there. Try to clean up as much as I can about that little preamble. But let's just go through the text and hopefully the lesson will be yours. Chapter 12, verse 1 beginning. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered. Everyone whose name shall be found written in the book, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the sun, bright like the sky above. And those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase, which seemed like an odd thing to say before he simply moves on to another subject. But let's stop and look at a number of those points that will hopefully give us a little bit of structure. First of all, a person who's rising, I'm usually expecting that to be Jesus, but this time it's Michael. And why is that important? Because once again, by the time we get to the Revelation, we will find that the one who actually put Satan out of heaven, it wasn't God, it wasn't the Christ, it was once again this Michael. And so understand that whatever Michael is, it seems pretty powerful and significant. And for the people of Israel, we hear all these stories about different princes. One of the things that I love about the Revelation is it helps us see, by the time you get too far into the story, as we mentioned before, the unveiling of the relationship between the things that we see and the things that are going on behind the scenes. And so ultimately, when you look at the picture of heaven, one of the things you see in the Revelation are all of the prayers of the saints. As we mentioned from time to time, prayers that you might not think are being heard, things that you've prayed for over and over and over again, that it might just seem they aren't really rising any higher than the ceiling. One of the things that's pictured in heaven is there's this altar with incense, and the prayers of the saints are described as a sweet-smelling aroma to God. And so understand in your life, try to personalize God for a minute. One of the reasons he's given us good smells is if you've ever walked into a room that don't smell so good, and you've realized the need to freshen that up. Or you've walked into a room quite the opposite. You're just minding your own business. You don't understand what the room smells like, but you're overwhelmed with what it smells like after the sisters and the brothers have actually cleaned the place. And you notice that it smells refreshing. No matter what happened outside, you're now in a place where you didn't expect it, but you got a positive or pleasant surprise. And understand that's what the imagery of the Revelation gives you of how God responds to your prayers. But as we mentioned before, as Brother Tony says from time to time, it's just not any old prayer that he views this way. What are some of the things that help our prayers refresh God? Well, as we continue on, you look at the end of verse 1. He'll say, it comes in a troubled time that Michael will rise. But the deliverance in the latter part of verse 1 is what they have to look forward to. The question is, what does their deliverance look like? Verse 2 is going to say, many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to everlasting shame and contempt. When it says many, this does not sound like the final resurrection. But much of what we see in the Old Testament, especially in the way of prophecy, it has a double meaning. Literally, we've talked about from time to time the great sermon on the day of Pentecost where a whole bunch of people were saved at the preaching of Peter. Once he left cowardice behind and no longer abandoned the Christ, but made it up in his mind that he was willing to embrace the same suffering that Christ did, his confidence spread. And one of the things he quoted was a prophecy from David, who said, you will not let your servant or your Holy One see corruption. And he interprets us for it in Acts 2. And he says, David's dead and buried in the ground. He's not talking about himself. But the words came to him in the Psalms because he was talking about things beyond his own understanding. David was not the only one. Daniel is literally going to go on and say, I did not understand these things as you heard in the scripture reading. But he was talking about things that both affected his life, the 4 statue period, the 4 animal period, and things he never could have imagined. Because the New Testament is literally going to say, we are living lives, as we said before, where we are enduring things that God willing are going to allow us to leave a legacy that lives beyond us. And so if all we're trying to do is make sense of our lives because of the things we see before we die, we're going to live lives that never fully reach their potential. As I mentioned last week, Mama always taught me about those who came before me so that I did not lose track of me getting to a certain level came on a certain foundation. And so it's easy for me to look backwards towards the foundation of what allowed me to be successful without looking towards a statement that we've heard. It was a cliche for a while, pay it forward. I can never pay Mom back for all the things that Mom did. That's not going to work. You're never really going to be able to pay your parents back to the degree you were blessed with good parents. It's not going to work. And so what you start to see is in generations, young men and women who are paying it forward to the next generation. And so we get it, as I often say, with investments. We get it with saving for college and this and this and that. But we don't always get it in terms of when I'm going through it. When I'm going through all the things that it takes to earn that money to do whatever it is I'm trying to prepare the next generation for. Sometimes I can get super frustrated if I don't realize that my struggles are also preparing them to handle whatever they have, whether it's a whole lot of money or not a lot. We just heard our sister is going through it because families, no matter what you got, we're coming to times where we're not ever going to be able to enjoy the fullness of life the way we wanted before. But when I hear of situations where there are preachers who have made that sacrifice for a lifetime, it takes me back to preachers beyond my family, where when the word says there's nobody who's left, mother or father, who's not going to get many times more than that in sufferings, but also in mother and father in this life. There are people when I left home who took me in on more than one occasion, back before I was making enough to support myself, right? There were preachers' families, ex-missionaries who literally, I talk about the ones who were nice enough to counsel me. I literally lived in their homes when there was nowhere else to stay. When I was interning as a youth minister, there was a family that took me in. Before I really had it, I had youth minister intern money, not enough to have my own place to stay. And so understand that when you are going through these difficult times, there are times where you might not necessarily know, how are we going to reconcile this? Understand, when I hear of ministers going through it, I have seen the way that God has returned the blessings to those who have made those sacrifices for me. And so I hurt with you when I hear about the struggle, but I do understand I've seen God take care, even in times when you don't know how it's going to happen. And so with that, it's the same thing that really gets me here with Daniel's story, because Daniel doesn't understand what is happening to him, but the beautiful part about it is he's told, don't worry about it, Daniel, these are for later days. He's still hurting with the saints. More than once you see when he gets these messages that he doesn't understand, he's not just like, oh, well, that's for later on, like we had King Hezekiah, a great king. But when he heard that the tragedy was going to fall on his kids, he's like, at least it ain't me, right? And understand, there are some times in life where life will drag you to that place where no matter how great a parent you thought you are now in a place of endurance where you're just like, I'm exhausted. I can't talk anymore. I can't do anymore. I can't fill in the blank anymore. I really wish I could make it perfect, but I can't. I've done all I can. Understand who Daniel is here. He's being given a prophecy of the tragedy that's going to fall two different generations of God's people. And so when I'm going through these 4s and these 3s, what we're seeing is quite possibly not only prophecies that are pointing forward to the end of days in the Revelation, where much of that, you just can't put the Revelation together in a way where we say that's just all history. There's just too many odd things that have gone on in the Revelation to say it's just already past. And so what happens, though, is that as we see these last two kingdoms, the feet and the midsection and the legs of bronze, that seem to represent Greece, because it keeps getting that Thor imagery all the way over and over again. And the movie monster that seems to be more like the legs of iron. Out of both of those kingdoms, the two is going to be, there are two little horns that are going to rise out of both of those kingdoms that are going to mark the end of those generations, or the reign of those kingdoms. Two of those kingdoms are going to be spared. They're not going to be completely destroyed, but they're no longer going to be the kind of power that you have seen them to be in the past. The Bible is literally calling its own shot. What's Greece today? They're not Ammon. They're not completely off the map. They're not the Edomites. They're not completely off the map. But just like he said thousands of years ago, they rose, Alexander the Great much, they fell, and he spared them to still exist without wiping them off the map like so many of the other nations that we have been looking at. So history bears these things out. Same thing, if you think the Romans are a thing, and we think the Romans might be the scary movie beast, it's still the same. He's going to wipe out that ruler that marked the decline of the Roman Empire, but they are still a thing. What's Rome today? What's Italy? It's a nice vacation spot, right? But world leaders aren't running their thoughts by, do we even know who the Italian prime minister is right now? Understand what he's talking about. He's talking about kingdoms he's going to show mercy, to whom he's going to show mercy, but they're just not going to be a thing anymore. And so understand when he's making these prophecies, he's talking to you about times during the end when these rulers get super angry about things that are not going to so much go their way. Guess who they're going to take it out on? And it's one of these things where in life, you are going to see in your own life, if you haven't already seen it, there are times when you are going to be in the presence of folks who can't get at the person they're actually mad at, and so who they take it out on is whoever they get their hands on. That is what is going to mark, as he's talking about these two little horns, he's going to see that's going to be a common characteristic of the little horn that marks the end of the kingdom of Greece, and a common characteristic of the little horn that marks the ending of the kingdom of Rome. And as he's putting these together in 4 beasts, he's saying you can look forward to this happening again. He's saying it's going to be a common characteristic of the persecution of the saints that you can look forward to in the book of the Revelation. Put it together yourself. Like I said, just go back if you want to look. Just click on the Romans 11 one. The Daniel 11 one that I did, and poke all the holes you want and shoot holes in it. That doesn't make any sense. Just look at the scriptures. Pull the thumbnails. I tried to highlight them for you. Just piece it together on your own time. I'm not trying to tell you what to think. I'm just trying to guide you through the scriptures as I see them. I tried to highlight them for you. And it took me a longer time. I say through the Bible in 5. That was a 12-minute video. I felt bad, but I put a short version. 7 was a short version. So I suggest the 12 if you want to look through these things, because these are the things that are puzzling Daniel. But he's saying they're not puzzles forever, because there's going to come a time when God is going to reveal the secrets, but not everybody is going to understand. He's going to say, if you've invested this much time in trying to get your kids ready for the future financially, maybe invest a little bit of time in trying to understand the future that God has told you quite possibly might be relevant for times ahead. Because even if it doesn't happen in your day, even if it doesn't happen the day of your kids, even if it doesn't happen the day of your kids' kids, just like they hand these stories down for generations, you need to get your generation that it is going to happen to ready. And so ultimately ignoring it is, in a lot of ways, I want to be rude, it's the ultimate act of myopathy to simply say it might not happen to me, so I don't care. Who are you getting ready for? Like I'm saying, we talked about that whole concept last week of there are certain families, like that one family that ends up as the priest. They were just always kind of low-key, as we talked about in the baseball metaphor. They just hit a bunch of singles. But their family business was loyalty and faithfulness to God and understanding the things that he was trying to get them to understand and pass down through the generations. And so by the time God couldn't even look to his priesthood for understanding what the law was calling them to do, because they were mixing it with whatever was popular, there was a family that kept that family tradition of genuinely understanding what God was saying alive. And so they were the ones who didn't have to go scramble to find the law and scan and look and see, can we find it here? No, it was woven into their family history, right along with all the provisions in the land allotments for their inheritance. And so understand, if all we care about is the things that seem like they're relevant for our lifetime, what are we handing on to people who are coming behind us? What are you handing on over to your kids? And that's what legacy is about. And that's why Daniel is a man that cares. That's what we said when you get to the book of Ezekiel. There are only 3 men that he says they would save their life. Daniel, Job, and Noah. In situations where he's going to get rid of the whole society, these 3 would stand, but they wouldn't even be able to save their families. One of the reasons is I think this man cares beyond himself. We don't see a whole lot about Daniel's family, but he's weeping because he sees the tragedy that's coming to the people of God who follow him. And he's not able to rest easy. In the same way we saw Nebuchadnezzar not able to rest easy in prophecies about himself. So understand, part of his ability to understand seems to come from the fact that he actually cared beyond himself. Verse 3, where it said, those who are wise shall shine like the sun in the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness. I'm going way too slow, but if we can get a better look of understanding, the way that this shapes up is we can look back to the wisdom literature to kind of get a better understanding of what all this wisdom and righteousness is. Why? Because the intro, like sometimes I try to give an intro to kind of let you know where I'm going. I use a title. It's not just a random title. God willing, it's a title that helps you understand what I'm trying to get across, what I'm trying to talk about, or God willing, at least what your takeaway might be if you don't understand anything else and all the rambling he does. Maybe 4, 3, 2, 1 will help you understand a little bit more about Daniel. Maybe Michael being surprisingly important will help you understand more about God's plan and the fact that you might not feel all that important, but you might want to listen for his call because you never know how big a role God might have for you in what he has planned to do. Beyond that, understand the Psalms, when they're starting out, books of David or simple words of David. You turn with me to Psalm chapter 1. Psalm chapter 1. It's going to give you a little bit better understanding maybe of this whole concept of what will endure as opposed to what is simply fading away. Famous psalm that opens up a lot of wisdom from one of Israel's greatest kings. Psalm 1 verse 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He's like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like the chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Just think back to what we just looked at as we turn to Proverbs chapter 1. The way in which he's talking about, there are some in that first resurrection where he says they're going to be raised to everlasting life, but there are others who are going to be raised to everlasting shame. As we go forward to Proverbs chapter 1 to see what David's son, the one to whom he handed the baton off, has to say about this concept of righteousness. And we know Proverbs is primarily devoted to wisdom, as you'll see, or as we'll see in the first 7 verses of Proverbs 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance, to understand a proverb and a saying of the words of the wise in their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. As we go back to Daniel chapter 12. Why did that matter to me? Well, other than the fact that I chase a lot of rabbits down rabbit holes. Verse 4, but you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and it's that random passage I mentioned before. And knowledge shall increase. Why is that there? Well, maybe if you think of the difference. What's the difference in your mind when you simply think of the difference between wisdom and knowledge? What comes to mind for you? Why isn't he just using the same word the entire time? Well, what he's talking about is twice we're going to see wisdom become a thing. He already said it in verse 3. But he's also going to say the wise will understand again at the end of verse 10. But he's talking about the increase of knowledge in between then. Understand the warning that gave to me as we start flipping forward. Please turn with me to 2 Timothy chapter 3. And a very famous warning, we'll call it, from Paul about the end times and what to expect in the last days, as the ESV titles it. He's going to title it Godlessness in the Last Days. 2 Timothy 3 verse 1. But understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving God, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness but denying its power. Avoid such people, for among them are those who creep into households and capture weak women burdened with sins and led astray by various passions, always learning but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. Go back to the chapter for me. Daniel chapter 12 for me. Go on back to Daniel chapter 12. And as I give you these other passages that have to deal with what other Bible authors have said about the end times, understand that there is a limit to knowledge in verse 4. And so for him to simply make an abrupt ending, the knowledge will get you to a certain point, but without wisdom, it's not really going to be enough. Understand how I've seen that play out in my life. There are times when Bible knowledge has led me to a place where I told you, without obedience, you're never really going to understand things. So there are times in life when I'll run this game. I will get to a point where somebody has taught me to a certain point, and the next thing that they're telling me, I like walking off the stage a lot. The next steps are absolutely clear, but I don't want to take those next steps. And so what happens is I start finding interesting, like I said, I'll chase a lot of rabbits. I start finding interesting theological rabbits to chase. I start finding other parts of the Bible I want to become a deep scholar in. I start finding things that might be more complicated than the thing I'm looking at right now, but because I know what that next step is, all of a sudden, I'm a theologian again. I've talked about it before, right? And so one of the ways that we talk about this whole concept of always learning but never coming to a knowledge of the truth is there's this thing I stole. He's been in the news right now because he's had some health problems. I'm not going to lie, I stole it from T.D. Jakes. He talks about trend of thought. When he leaves his times where he's simply preaching and he tells you how it works, like they talk about how the sausage is made, right? He says there's this thing called trend of thought that keeps you from aimlessly reading the Bible. And if you are not following the trend of thought that God is trying to lead you to, then what you may find yourself doing is, you remember Israel in the wilderness for 40 years? Were they not? They weren't God's people. They stopped being God's people. No! They were God's people walking in circles. And understand, God might not collectively walk us around in circles, but he gives us the opportunity to ignore the trend of thought that he is trying to put in front of us for our lives. See, if the Bible were telling me the way to find a milli, a stack, $1 million, like I said, to end all my financial cares, I'm pretty much sure that I'd find a way to at least try to walk straight toward that pot of that milli, right? Oh, but when he starts talking about the kinds of things that he's describing for the people of God, then all of a sudden I'm starting to look for alternatives as we continue on in verse 5 through the end of the chapter, where it'll read, "Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood, one on this bank of the stream and the other on that bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, How long shall it be till the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven and swore to him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished." Understand, one of the best parts for me in all of this is going back to the chapter where Daniel, as our brother said, reminds us in the Bible we win. And Daniel gets a really short prophecy on those four beasts, where the short answer that the angel, I think it's Gabriel, gives him is, the saints inherit the kingdom. The end, ta-da. But Daniel's like, no, wait a minute, bud. What about the fourth beast? Well, there's going to be a whole lot dying and whatnot right? And so that's the wisdom that Daniel has. Daniel doesn't start chasing rabbits as soon as he gets even a happy word about how things end. He wants to know it all, not for any vain purpose, but he wants to know, what should I really expect winning to look like? Which is what we've talked about before. When David was anointed king, one of the reasons why I go back to the Psalms, to show us what the comparison between short-lived leadership and leadership that God says will last forever, even if it's not in this lifetime, like our brother said, that extends through eternity to be raised to, everlasting life, is because you want to know what winning actually looked like for David. Like we talked about before in his story, where killing the giant meant you're getting the theme songs written for you, bud. But the theme songs are a little too good because they're creating backlash. And the very folks you were killing the giants for are now turning to try to take that's what success looks like, y'all. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That's the reality of it as through David's life, right? There are times when even once you've gotten through that wilderness and you actually get to the throne, it's simple now, right? No. He's got rivals before he can get the throne to his son. His other son wants the throne. And so now they're fighting over the inheritance. That's what success looks like, y'all. I hate to break it to you, but that's the reality of it. And that's the depth of these stories. Because like we said in times past, it's one of my dead horse issues. I want you to just be happy all the time, but is that the life you're living right now? Thank you. It's not mine either. And it's not all about failure, but it's the reality of what success actually looks like that Daniel is still curious about, even when he's getting the good news. And that's the beauty of what Daniel's doing. He said, even though the news may be better for me than it is for them, he realizes where he fits. And after I die, it's not just about me. God willing, I've left behind something that can help people whose struggles I can already identify with, even if I never meet them. And once I start to love people more, I don't want them to have to relearn all my lessons all over again. God willing, I've left a record that can cut short their suffering and prolong their success. And so the less I worry about how it's affecting me, the more I can concern myself with, okay, even if it's not going to be super bad in my days, how can I live the kind of life that actually cares about people who are going to suffer like me, either in this generation or generations afterward? As we go on. Good news is, before we go on from there, my translation, the ESV, and compare your translations, when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end. Understand, the power or the shattering of the power of the holy people is not forever. So in all of these generations, when there was persecution at the end of these nations, whether it was the Greeks, the Romans, or a kingdom that he's pointing forward to that we can expect persecution from, it happens for a time. Anybody want to give me an interpretation of a time, times, and half a time? Yeah, me neither. Daniel didn't get it either. And so understand, one of the great things in life is, said in one of the short lessons, I can have a whole lot of joy even in uncertainty if I can find a way to have peace. Because the answer that he gets is no answer at all. So at least tell me the outcome of these things. Don't worry about it, bud. You're going to rest, God willing, you're going to rest peacefully until your time to rise has come. As we continue on, verse 8. I heard, but I did not understand. Then I said, O my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? He said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. Understand, I don't think that concept of wisdom is really all that separate from that concept of purity. And understand, one of the things I may be making an ESV issue over, but I really like the way, sometimes I complain, unfortunately, about the ESV. I don't complain much, but when I do, I feel bad. It says, many shall purify themselves. And I didn't hear that in every translation I got a chance to hear. But the passive voice kicks in when he talks about their refinement. He says, and make themselves white and be refined. Understand the relationship there. As we talked about before, I can be submerged in the best seas. I can be exposed to the best of everything. But as we talked about the way in which the heart controls the valve on the mind, I only take in that which my heart allows me to be open to and receive. And so when he says, I've got to purify myself so that I'm not turning the valve off when he's giving me good things like this whole concept of the refinement, please turn forward with me to Malachi, the very end of the Old Testament. Where we get two things in common with Daniel's prophecy here. Once again, it's another prophecy about the end times or the end of a time, and it's another prophecy about this concept of refinement. Verse 1 of chapter 3, behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. And the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and a fuller's soap. He will sit as a refiner and a purifier of silver. And he will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver. And they will bring offerings in righteousness to the Lord. Then the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to the Lord to be pleasing to the Lord as in the days of old, as in the former years. Then I will draw near to you for judgment. I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, against the adulterers, against those who swear falsely, against those who oppress the hired worker in his wages, the widow and the fatherless, and those who thrust aside the sojourner, and do not fear me, says the Lord of hosts. Once again, the good news is you're going to be refined. But the question is, what does that actually look like? So that I can understand when God is telling me the things that I need to get rid of, that I look at this list and I'm like, just like that stinky room I walk into, I might want to walk the other way. Understanding that when we're talking about the prayers that are a sweet-smelling aroma to God, they are not in the, hold on, I lost my page. They are not in that verse 5 list. And so understand, these are practical tips for when you see things on this list. Sometimes we expect God's fire to look like this great, fantastic, jaw-dropping event in our lives. But understand, by the time Belshazzar, to whom two of these prophecies, the 4 animals and the 2 goats comes, by the time it's earth-shattering, it's famous prophecy, the handwriting is on the wall. By the time it's earth-shattering, he doesn't have 24 hours to get things right. And that's why the generational sin matters. See, sometimes I assume I'm going to get just as much time as mama had. Sometimes I'm going to get just as much time as grandma. Grandma lived a long time, right? Or even beyond the time, I'm going to get every opportunity they had. But I lose track of the way that when I'm wandering and I'm chasing rabbits when God is trying to point me into a certain direction, I am not the only one. That is one of the reasons why it's so important to understand history. Because I'm building on a foundation, sometimes without a full understanding of where God's patience is. And that's why the history matters. Because when we become, once again, preoccupied with what's in it for me, we lose track of, like we said, going back to the day when he led them into that 40 years of walking around in the wilderness, they lost track. They simply got in the habit of anytime they were unhappy, they could complain and water would appear. They could complain and manna would fall from the sky. And sometimes he'd throw some quail in. They got in the habit of complaining and only being so concerned about, wait a minute, it's like when you see kids throw a tantrum. If you don't break them out of tantrums as a tool of, let's just call it what it becomes when we get older, a tool of something out of you. I don't care how you feel about it. And understand that when God is bringing us Jesus, who we thank God for, but he's saying, you're not going to see God, but you are going to see him in people that you meet that you never knew. Tony did a Wednesday night on that 2 weeks ago. Man who was looking for and he said, sir, I need some help. He's like, no, you got to get out of here. You missed us. Jesus wept, didn't he? The spirit that indwells us feels. And there are times if we get so in the habits of keeping up those same behaviors that allowed us to get our way when we were this high, and we never grow out of that, we lose touch with not only the way that we are wearing through the patience of the people around us, but the way in which wearing through the patience of the people around us is wearing through the patience of God. And so that is one of the reasons why it's so important to understand that when you see the things on this list, the word literally says, do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God. We have talked about that in small group. You are literally warned as a New Testament Christian not to grieve his spirit. And that's one of the things that he's helping you understand. When he's put us together in a body, I talked about it before in the Matthew 18 thing, and I am rambling. It's time to shut up, time to sit down. But he says, woe to the one, temptations to sin must come. But woe to the one through whom temptation comes. And what does he say? Marcus, stop making stuff up? No. He says if you have allowed yourself as a member of his body to become an instrument of temptation, it would literally be better for you for a millstone to be tied around your neck and you to be thrown into the sea. I'm preaching too long, but I'm going to give an old illustration I haven't used in a while. I got to go to one of my buddies' weddings out in one of them islands. They had money. They let one of their, okay, I wasn't poor then, but yeah, life changes. And so I got to go. And one of the things we got to do were scuba lessons. It was really fun. But if you've never really been in that situation before, it's easy to ignore some of the instructions about regulating because there are little air pockets in your head you don't know about until you get too deep underwater and it feels like your head's going to explode. Right? Or if you come up the wrong way and you get the dual feeling of simultaneously, how can I feel like my head's exploding and I'm being crushed all at the same time? I don't get that. But that's what it feels like. And so when we hear these things about, oh, let's just tie a millstone around his neck and it's not drowning. It's 3 forms of agony. Your lungs filling up to where you can't breathe. You're feeling like you're being crushed and it seems like your head's going to explode. It's torture. And God says that's the kind of future you can look forward to if you get in the habit of being so fixated on getting your way that you don't realize the way in which you're putting in your brother and sister's ways stumbling blocks that are making it more difficult for them to find their peace of mind in this life that is already hard enough. And so with that, closing out, y'all. The rest of the chapter reads, verse 11, and from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who awaits and arrives at the 1,335 days. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and stand in your allotted place at the end of the days. Please turn with me to something that Jesus himself says about the end times in Matthew 24, as God willing we draw to a close. Matthew chapter 24. You can really read the entire chapter because his disciples are really excited about getting to see the temple. It's like if you've ever been in a situation where I used to live near in Houston. NASA's not too far away from Houston. They take us to field trips. So before you get to go to NASA, you get to see, every now and again on the TV, you get to see the spaceships going up. Like, we really live that close to all that? And then you go to NASA and you see, oh, that's the one that went up then, and that's the one that went up there. That's kind of how they're reacting to the temple. They don't live very far away from it, but they haven't really gotten to go. But their reaction to the temple as kind of tourists is a whole lot different than God or Jesus' reaction to the temple basically as God, because he sees what's about to happen. And that's the context for him basically trying to rein in their joy at seeing the temple, because the spirit that is now at work in too many parts of the temple is one that he has, like we said, he has grown frustrated in times when they are still excited. Let's just start at verse 1. Chapter 24, verse 1. Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered, you see all these? Do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be one. Let me slow down. Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the close of the age? Another end-time prophecy. And Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these things are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. That's too much to preach. It's too much to even try to conclude on. But when you see those numbers in the book of Daniel, as we go back to the chapter 12 of the book of Daniel, he's talking about, wait a minute, what am I looking forward to? Okay. Then there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. I don't know what the difference is. I just know the period that he's saying is blessed requires additional endurance. And so if there's nothing else that you take away from these things, these words, I can tell you over and over again every Sunday that running your race is like a marathon runner. I can tell a good long distance runner, it's going to take a while, right? But it's another thing to be trained and to hit the road and actually prepare yourself for what it's like to suffer all of the things that all of these people talking about the end times say are going to happen to the people of God as these nations decline and rage against God. And so understand that no matter whether or not it happens in your lifetime, God willing, you are raising people, or even you can be a person like me, ain't got no kids. God willing, you are living the kind of life that will help other people raise kids that don't simply know they got to have endurance, like they eat like me on a cheat day. Every carbohydrate in Lewiston is mine, right? But you can't be like that all the time, right? That's a cheat day. That's to get me through those times when the run is going to be a little bit longer, right? And then I have to, if I'm wise, I got to taper my eating through the week. Otherwise, the run doesn't make any sense at all. I'm just running in place. And I'm eating away all my gains. All right, I'm shutting up. I'm done. right? But you get it, right? It's not only understanding things that you might not need, but things that are getting your generations in condition to be tough enough to be the kind of people who are built to endure whatever. We say the success or the failure. So with that, I don't have a bow to put on it, but I do know we're in the middle of football season, and a lot of people are decrying away. It's not the same game anymore. You can't hit them. It's like flag football now. Why do they make so much money to play touch football? Okay, that's not everybody. That's me in front of my TV just about every Sunday and Saturday. But the bottom line is, look, the players still want to get at it, but they're in a situation where they can't the same way. And so over time, even the fans catch on that this isn't the same thing that we used to watch a few seasons ago. And it's one thing if it's just me, my armchair quarterback position, but it's old players who are saying, it's hard for me to get into it because it's different. And understand how these men, these women who lived with them, they understand what it's not only like to be the kind of person who prepares yourself to actually do battle, but to live with a person and yourself, prepare yourself for not only your battles, but the battles that everybody else in that household has to fight. The wives or however the roles are in your household, they suffer too, just as much, if not more. I've talked about it before. There is no mission field if it ain't for mama. So I can try to get all the glory I can about all the different places I've been and all the different places I might have preached. But about mama, ain't none of that happened. Right? And so with that, God willing, you are creating households where people you may never meet have a strength that will be credited back to you long after you are gone. As we together stand and sing.